Welcome to the Depth Dive. Today we are really unpacking a stack of sources focused on something so fundamental. It's something that I think often gets lost in this, dizzying pursuit of modern success. We're talking about the true meaning of safety, how our earliest relationships kind of set our blueprint for life, and the surprising way we can heal those old relational wounds.
It's a really crucial deep dive.
Yeah.
Because you might be out there highly successful, just crushing it professionally, making all the money, and yet you still feel this deep, kind of pervasive sense of disconnection or anxiety. Our sources frame this core tension perfectly, I think. We live in a culture that pushes this intense independence.
Right.
But we are biologically wired, first and foremost, for connection. So we're going to explore why achieving one so often sabotages the other, and how the body itself acts as this silent historical record keeper for everything we've been through.
Okay, let's get into this, starting with the foundational concept. What is safety, really? I mean, the sources offer a starting point that's, well, it's beautifully simple. Safety is feeling connected, a sense of togetherness, and this relaxed, open feeling in the body. That just sounds instantly restorative.
It's the feeling we're all striving for, right?
Yeah.
But the deeper insight that came out of this research, specifically from notes on these emotional healing retreats, was that safety isn't about ensuring hard stuff doesn't happen to you. It's knowing you will be okay no matter what happens.
Oh.
That you'll survive the crisis, you will move through it, and you'll be functional on the other side.
Wow, that completely shifts the goalpost. It moves safety from an external promise like the world won't hurt me to an internal certainty that I can handle the hurt.
Exactly. But the sources are quick to point out that safety is not just internal, it can be outsourced. Think about real-world scenarios, global crises, war, profound professional uncertainty. Having a strong, reliable support system, people who will truly be there, not just when it's easy, that provides an immense sense of safety, even when the world is just utterly chaotic.
I get that, but if safety is ultimately knowing I'll be okay on my own, doesn't outsourcing risk dependency? How do we balance that internal certainty with external reliance without setting ourselves up for potential abandonment?
That is the critical balance. The point isn't total dependence. It's more about secure interdependence. The support system acts as an anchor until your internal system is strong enough. And this is where secure attachment is built. It happens when you internalize the safety from people who have a wide window of tolerance themselves.
Right.
They're regulated, they can handle big feelings, and through co-regulation with them, you internalize that sense of groundedness. That is what lets you feel safe in the world.
Which brings us to what the material calls the independent trap. We live in a world where success, agency, and just radical self-sufficiency are held up as these ultimate prizes. And we see people, especially high achievers, who embody that energy, yet feel deeply unsafe or lonely inside.
They're living a total contradiction. So since many of us don't have safe, relational ways to process difficult feelings from childhood, we unconsciously develop what are called protective strategies, or inner protectors. These are basically compulsive behaviors we use to avoid what's going on inside our bodies.
So things like workaholism, drinking, maybe excessive exercise, even doom scrolling or vaping, behaviors that keep us busy enough or numb enough to sort of distance ourselves from those deeper, unsettling feelings of fear or lack.
Yeah, their role is strictly protective, to create distance. But let's look at the neurological shift here, because this is the mechanism for how success so often breeds loneliness. The culture just relentlessly pushes this fierce independence, self-sufficiency, forcing us to shift intensely into the left hemisphere of the brain. That's the productive, logical, linear doer mode. It's great at tasks.
The part of the brain that loves a to-do list.
Precisely. But living constantly in that doer mode means you're operating in a persistent state of sympathetic activation. Survival mode, essentially.
Yeah.
The gas pedal's always pressed down. And that disconnects us from the right hemisphere, which is where relating, connection, and emotional processing happen.
The insight that really jumped out at me was just the sheer scale of this problem. The sources estimate that something like 75% of Western culture lives more left-shifted.
And that, they argue, is the underlying reason for this epidemic of loneliness. You cannot access deep relational connection when your nervous system is in sympathetic activation. If your system is ready to fight or flee, It certainly isn't ready to drop its guard and deeply connect.
And it's a vicious dual reinforcement, right? The independence trap works because first, it acts as a kind of prophylactic. If you become the one who never needs anyone, you're never at their mercy. Your life feels predictable, maybe a little grayer, but it's contained. You eliminate the relational risk.
And second, the external world absolutely rewards it. Meritocracy loves agency. You get the status, the promotions, the boss lady energy accolades, the paycheck. That combination makes the path incredibly compelling. It's a high-functioning dopamine trap that just keeps you doing more, achieving more, and isolating more.
So you reach the top, you have everything you thought you wanted, the financial security, the agency, and yet you feel utterly disconnected from your emotions, your body, and often, yeah, just lonely on that mountaintop. It's an unteachable lesson, the sources argue. Most people have to become successful first to realize that external achievement doesn't solve the internal safety problem.
Which forces us to ask, okay, if independence is so isolating, why do people, even after achieving success, struggle to choose healthy, connected partners? This is where the sources offer a fascinating counterpoint by looking at how past trauma influences our present choices.
This is the paradox of familiarity, why we so often choose intensity and chaos over true intimacy and calm.
Exactly. Relational trauma and attachment wounds aren't stored logically, not in explicit memory. Those parts of the brain develop later. They're stored in the body primarily through sensation, implicit memory. That's why the signs of unsafety are so visceral. The gut-dropping, heart-racing, feeling smothered, or having this huge reaction to something small, like a blank stare.
And that blank stare is so important because, for a baby, a caregiver checking out or showing a flat affect that signals danger. The lack of connection is a biological threat.
Precisely. That past environment creates the blueprint. And here's the core paradox. Our nervous system, deep down, confuses familiarity with safety. We are wired to attract the familiar from our original childhood dynamics. Even if your familiar pattern involved chaos or neglect or inconsistency, your system knows what to expect. And that predictability registers as safer than the unknown.
So if your childhood home was intense or inconsistent, that early rush of chemicals in dating, the push and pull that can feel like chemistry, it can even masquerade as true love. Intensity feels like home.
That initial intensity is so beguiling, but it is not true closeness. And here's the really crucial insight. Your capacity for tolerating familiar mistreatment is greater than your tolerance for the unknown. If you grew up with a parent who was emotionally absent, you're more likely to stay in a relationship that repeats that neglect because your nervous system says, oh, I know this song. I survived it before.
And we see this destructive pattern played out perfectly in the anxious-avoidant dynamic. The sources use this as a textbook example of familiarity creating friction.
Oh, yes. When they're activated, the anxious person runs toward their partner out of a fear of abandonment, looking for reassurance. Meanwhile, the avoidant person runs away for space to try and regulate themselves. They desperately need the opposite of what the other can provide in that moment.
So they're just trapped.
Trapped in that cycle of predictable, familiar friction.
So how do we start moving toward healing? I mean, if your career is working, if that independence is paying the bills, why should you slow down and risk dismantling the very life you've built?
The sources are really clear. The approach is not to quit everything overnight. It's about recognizing you need to shift resources. You slow down inch by inch, you start delegating, and you cautiously, carefully invite people in. True safety, that stable internal foundation, it doesn't require less risk. It actually allows for bigger risk-taking in the world because you know you can handle failure.
And if the wounds were created in a relationship, they have to be healed in relationship. This means co-regulation, which brings us to the importance of the ventral state. Can you walk us through what that state actually feels like for the listener?
Absolutely. The ventral state, or ventral vagal state, is the physiological state of safety and social engagement. It's what we're aiming for. When you're in it, you feel a calm breath, you can make natural eye contact, your thoughts feel expansive, and you feel free and open in your body. Healing requires finding secure anchors who can offer what the sources call good space holding.
What defines good space holding? Because I think we often look for people who will fix us or tell us what to do.
Good space holding is the exact opposite of fixing. It means they don't try to fix you or change you. Instead, they're regulated. Their ventral nervous system holds your temporary dysregulation. It helps your system return to ventral without judgment. We simply cannot process and move deep trauma alone because we need that relational mirror to feel safe enough to process the pain. And this requires vulnerability, which is why true safety can initially feel scary or foreign, because it demands facing what's inside, not just escaping it.
And that leads us to the critical importance of rupture and repair. Conflict is inevitable in any relationship, but the sources frame it not as a failure, but as an opportunity for deeper intimacy.
Exactly. The whole goal of going through that conflict is to achieve what's called a disconfirming experience. This is a powerful transformative concept.
Okay, give us an example. What does a successful disconfirming experience look like in practice?
It means revisiting a painful, maybe shameful or vulnerable memory, a time you felt abandoned or dismissed, and having that memory met completely differently today by a secure anchor or therapist. So, for example, if you expect anger when you express sadness, but instead you're met with unconditional acceptance and deep curiosity, that new experience disconfirms your old expectation. Your nervous system updates its relational database. A healthy rupture and repair cycle should always lead to a stronger connection. You go from the baseline down to -1 during the conflict, and then up to +1 through the intimacy built during the repair.
This work sounds incredibly challenging, especially when we consider cultural pressures, particularly on men. The sources noted that for many men, this work is particularly difficult because emotional vulnerability fundamentally conflicts with cultural definitions of masculinity, which often prioritize, emotional control.
It's a very valid barrier. To heal, you have to be prepared to revisit the most painful parts of your past. And if traditional definitions of competence or self-worth rest on never showing weakness or maintaining the shield of emotional mastery, then the incentive to do this difficult relational work, it just disappears. The emotional cost of vulnerability can often outweigh the perceived benefit of connection in a culture that rewards emotional distance.
So, what does this all mean for you, the learner, as we wrap up this deep dive? I think the main takeaway is that you cannot fix relational trauma alone. We need secure anchors, professionals, safe environments to heal the wounds that were created relationally. The starting point is always understanding your earliest relationship dynamics.
Yes, and that means identifying the patterns and core wounds that you're repeating today, often conceptualized through frameworks like the wheel of attachment.
Before we close, can we quickly define that for listeners who might not be familiar with that specific term?
Of course. The wheel of attachment is really just a way to visualize the cycle of unmet needs and emotional patterns you learn from your primary caregivers. It shows how the core dynamic of your childhood, that mix of availability and non-availability, sets the default emotional temperature for all your adult relationships. Understanding the wheel means seeing the pattern so you can eventually step off it.
That brings a lot of clarity to a very complex issue. And here's the final provocative thought our sources raise, something for you to consider as you finish this deep dive. For many successful adults who have done this interior work, the ruthless question becomes this: would you have rather grown up with less money but more emotional availability from your parents? The source material suggests the answer for many who are tapped in is a resounding yes. And this raises a profound question about what we are prioritizing or failing to prioritize for the next generation.